This is Alex, and welcome to Barely Braided, where we're taking a deep, deep dive into foster care, adoption, and all things parenting, even the sticky stuff. Welcome to episode 21. Today I have another amazing guest. I always love hearing stories from other foster and adoptive parents, and I have received a lot of positive feedback that you all love hearing these stories as well. So today I have Ginger. Ginger is a biological mom. She also did foster care and is a mom to adopted children. But what's also really interesting and unique about Ginger is that she authored and published a children's book written from the perspective of her oldest son that will soon be available for sale. She let me get a sneak peek of her book, and it's so cute. The concept is great, but I'm going to let her tell you about that. She's also a full-time high school math teacher, so big welcome to Ginger. Thank you for being here and talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. I'm excited to hear your story and hear about the book and hopefully share the message that you've written in it because, like I said, I thought it was super cute. So let's start from the beginning, if you don't mind. Talk a little bit about how your family began with like your husband and your biological children and how your family started.
Sure. So my husband and I actually married pretty young. I was only 20 when we got married and he was 21 and I was still in college. So I finished up college and taught for a few years before we started having kids. So 5 years into our marriage, we had our first son. And then 2 years later, we had a daughter. And then a year and a half later, we had another daughter. And at that point, we both started feeling that we were called to adoption. And I don't know how much detail you want me to go into on that story because it's a pretty cool story. But that's when we switched from having biological kids to fostering and adopting, was after our third daughter was born. Or second daughter or third child.
Well, yeah, go into detail for sure. I want to hear it.
So it all started, our church was having a women's ice cream social. And so obviously I was there, not my husband. And I was just sitting there eating my, cookie dough ice cream. And a woman from the church who has adopted overseas 4 times was sharing her story. And as I'm just sitting there eating my ice cream, out of nowhere, I just felt God telling me very clearly that we were supposed to adopt. And so I came home and I told my husband, I was like, I think we're supposed to adopt. And his initial response was, no, I don't think so. I don't feel that at all. And I was like, okay. And so I was praying and I told God, I was like, okay, if you really do want us to adopt, talk to Dustin on your own, because I don't want it to be where I'm harassing him or nagging him into it. Like, I want it to be where he knows very clearly that that's what we're supposed to do. And so about 2 months later, I actually had to miss church because I had a sinus infection. So Dustin took the kids and went, and he came home, and out of nowhere, he was just like, you're right, we're supposed to adopt. Like, I felt it at church today that that's what we're supposed to do. And so that was super cool. And he had one more semester of engineering school because he went back and got a second degree after we were married and had kids. So we took that semester to really pray and research and talk to all of our friends that have adopted because, as you know, there's so many kiddos that need adoption in so many different situations. And so we weren't sure, like, are we supposed to do overseas adoption or domestic infant adoption or foster care with possibility of adoption? And at the end of the semester, we both felt very clearly that we were called to foster with the possibility of adopting those kiddos that needed that forever home. And that's how we started our foster care journey.
Okay. So that's really interesting because like throughout life, I will hear people tell me like I heard a sign from God or I knew that this was something that I was put on this earth to do. And I will tell you, we don't talk about it so much in our podcast just because we kind of focus on the logistics of foster care. But I am Christian. My husband is Christian. And I guess I don't feel signs from God to do anything. And I think it's because I'm like looking in the wrong places. So can you talk a little bit about like how do people feel those signs or those messages? Or is it just a thought that comes into your head? How does that work? I'm just curious.
That's a great question. And I truly think it's going to be different for everyone because I feel like God is such a personal God that the way he talks to me might not be the same way he talks to my husband even. But for me, it's this like, I don't know how to explain it besides like a fire in my belly. Does that make sense? Where it's just like, I just know this is what I'm supposed to do and it doesn't go away. And so it's like, it just keeps growing until I finally like do it. And then I finally start to feel peace and I don't feel that like fire, like this is something you got to do. And until I do it, I just keep feeling it. That's the best way I can think to describe it.
Well, that is very interesting because as you're describing it, I think back to maybe similar feelings and maybe that's what that was. Like, for example, starting the podcast, it was something that I had my mind set on it. I thought about it all the time. I thought it would be a good idea. I didn't really know anybody else who like podcasted, so I'm not sure where the idea came from. But now that I'm doing it, it's very fulfilling and therapeutic. So maybe that's the same kind of deal.
I think so. I truly think that the Holy Spirit, he's not going to always, I think he very rarely gives you a sign that is like something huge and monumental and like, I don't know, awe-inspiring. I think usually it's more like nudges and changing what you desire to kind of line up with what he's calling you to do. So
okay. So like there's
but
kind
I do
of
know
a
some
subtlety.
friends. For me, yes. And I do think that different people, sometimes he uses different things to speak to them. Another thing that's super interesting is like, I usually know when our family needs to make a big change before my husband because I fight it more. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm really stubborn. And so like, it takes me a while to accept that that's what we're being called to do sometimes. Whereas my husband, as soon as he feels like we're supposed to do something, he's like, let's do it now. Like he doesn't wait. He's just like all in. So a lot of times when we've been called to make big changes, I've kind of known and wrestled with it for a few months before my husband. And because as soon as my husband's like, this is what we're supposed to do, it's like, we're going. And so I think that's interesting how God kind of gives me sometimes that time to really wrestle and come to peace and feel like, yeah, this is what we're supposed to do because he knows that I need that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think I relate more with your husband in that aspect because I'm just thinking back to when we signed up for the initial foster parent training classes. It was just a thought in my head that hadn't been there for a very long time. Joel and I were both at work, so I sent him a little chat message and I said, hey, what do you think about foster care? He said, yeah, I'm open to the idea. And we were signed up for classes that day. So I don't take that time to like think about it. I'm more like your husband, I think, in that aspect. So I just realized I never even asked, what part of the country do you live in?
We live in Kansas.
Okay. So what do the training requirements look like in Kansas?
So there's a 10-week course that you have to do. And it is, I believe, it's been a few years now, but I believe it's 3 hours a week, once a week that you go and you do the courses. And then there's, assignments you have to do. And at the end, there's like a sort of like a test you have to take. It's not like super hard, but to make sure that you really grasped a lot of the concepts that were in the course. And then there are requirements for like ongoing training. So like every year to keep your license, depending on the level of care, you have so many hours of training that you have to do either in person or online in different kind of categories. And then there's just the legal trainings you have to do, like medication distribution. And I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that you have to do every year just to make sure you're kind of abiding by those legal things, like confidentiality, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I think we also are required to do the medication administration, CPR, and first aid every year, I think.
Yes. And then we also had to do, I think it's HIPAA is what they called it for the class.
Oh, I feel like we learned that information, but maybe the class just had a different title, something like that. Did you do a home study, like where somebody came out and like verified that your home was safe and everything was locked up?
Yes. So after we finished those 10 weeks of training and our online, like the medication stuff were online, then we had a huge packet we had to fill out. I don't know if you had this packet that was like just huge. And then after you did the packet and had everything ready, then the state came out and did a walkthrough. They called it a walkthrough instead of a home study, but it was pretty much the same thing. And then we didn't do a legitimate, what they call home study until we were adopting. And so the state kind of differentiates those two in Kansas. I'm not sure why.
So what was the timeline from your first class to being approved to your first placement call?
So we started the classes in January of that year. We were licensed, I believe, June or July. And once we got approved, it took, I think, like 3 weeks before we actually got our license. There was like a delay. And pretty much we got our license, and within a week, we had 3 kiddos living with us.
Whoa, that's so quick. Okay,
yeah, well, it was insane.
I definitely want to get into the placements and your foster care journey, but first I want to learn about your book, or like kind of the basics. How did the idea come about? And then like, what was the process like for writing and getting illustrations and publishing?
Yeah, so my book actually started as a photo video, I guess you would say, that I created when we were in the process of adopting, I'm going to call her Lavender. And we had done family pictures after she came to live with us when we knew that we were going to be her adoptive resource, because we wanted her to really feel welcome and part of the family. And so I did a little photo video where I talked about how each of our family members is like a patch and a quilt, and kind of did that. And after I did that, I don't remember who, someone said something about, oh, that'd be a really cool idea for a book. And so I was like, oh, that'd be fun. So I kind of wrote a story. And I meant for it just mainly to be for my family, like, you know, a family book just for us. And I had a few friends that are English teachers since I teach at the high school. And I asked them if they would read through it and edit it for me and give me feedback on how to make it better. And one of them, especially after she read it, she was like, you need to publish this. You need to get this story out. This is like a really important story. A lot of people don't know about, you know, the details, and you just need to publish it. And so at that point, I sent it out to a variety of traditional publishers and agents just to see if it could get picked up and published, but I never heard back from any of them. And so I kind of thought that was like, okay, maybe this book's not supposed to be published. Maybe it is just supposed to be for my family. And then I'd say about a year went by. And one day I just decided, okay, it's time to do this. Like, I'm just going to self-publish and let's get this done. And I had not done any illustrations yet, because if you do a traditional publisher, they want to do the illustrations themselves. But I have a really amazing friend who has an art degree and is amazing at art. And I knew that I wanted her to illustrate if I was going to do it myself. So I met with her actually in March, right before things with COVID got really bad. We had a meeting at a coffee house. It was like the last day they were open. And we sat down, we talked about the illustrations. She started working on them, and she finished them right before I started my Kickstarter. And that's how I was able to do the cost of self-publishing, was by doing a Kickstarter.
Okay, so when will the book be available for the public to purchase it?
So it should be here the beginning of December. It's possible the end of November, but it's probably going to be December when it gets here. So it's being printed right now, but there's like a long kind of line. It's in line at the printers, I guess you would say.
Okay, I feel like that's really good time, because it seems like it would be a great gift for a friend who's considering foster care, or a current foster or adoptive parent. It seems like a great like holiday or Christmas gift.
Yeah, I hope so. And a lot of my people that backed me were really excited to find out it should be here by Christmas, because quite a few of them bought it as gifts for either their own kids or friends' kids, or I had a few that know families that do foster care, and they bought them for them. So I'm really excited that it should be here by Christmas.
Can people still do pre-orders through your Kickstarter or through anywhere?
No, but I do on my website have a way where they can sign up on their email, and I will send them as soon as it's available the link to buy them. But unfortunately, the Kickstarter, once it ended, there's no way to purchase through that. And Amazon won't let me do pre-orders until I actually have the book. So we're kind of in this like limbo land between backing it and actually having them where people can purchase it.
So if I want to be notified via email, what is your website where I can sign up?
Yep, it's just mypatchworkfamilybook.com. And
I love that concept.
And right on that main page at the bottom, there's just a place to put in your email address. And then as soon as the books are available, I will email everybody
So cute. That is such a creative concept. I absolutely love it. So I'm excited to sign up. I know you gave me a sneak preview of the book, but I would really like to have a physical copy and, keep it in the bookshelf because I feel like there are not many books about foster care and adoption. And I haven't really explored that world and like seeked out that type of book, but it's always good to have in your bookshelf if you're a foster or adoptive family.
I agree. And I don't think I even told you last time when we did our sound check that I've started working on the sequel already. And it's going to actually be from Lavender's perspective. And she's helping me decide how much of her story she wants to share and how she wants to share it. So I'm really excited that I'm going to have a book about her family from my oldest biological son's perspective. And then also from one of my adoptive kiddo who we adopted when she was older, her perspective and what she went through to kind of, I don't know, help people understand all the different perspectives of a family that's been put together like ours has.
How old is she now?
She is 13.
Oh, so she probably has great input and she knows what she's comfortable with and what she's not comfortable with.
Yes. So and like I said, I've given her like, hey, do you want to include this? Do you want to leave that out? And I even asked her at the beginning, do you even feel like it's time? Like, do you want to share your story yet? Or are you, not ready? Because I really feel strongly that even kids need to be in charge of their story and, what people know about them. And I think it's very liberating for them to be able to decide that and to feel like they have that freedom to voice their own voice. So I'm really excited about it.
Absolutely. And I feel like too, especially in foster care, maybe not necessarily after an adoption has happened, but in foster care, older children seem to have very few, they don't have a whole lot of control over the things that happen to them, the appointments they go to, the visits they attend, who they see, who they live with. And so being able to make those decisions is always really, really important.
I totally agree. I think a lot of times they just get shuffled around and don't have any say. And that's really hard when you don't get to control or have any sort of say in what happens, where you go, what doctors you see, anything like that.
Yes. What did the beginning of the foster process look like for you? Like when you immediately started getting calls, you had said you had 3 children right away. And then how did that turn into adoption?
So it's kind of an interesting story. So the 3 kiddos we had right away, one of them was actually Lavender with her 2 biological brothers. And we had them for a year before they moved out. And then we didn't know anything. I don't know if you're like this, but in Kansas, once they move out, you don't know anything about them. Like you don't know where they go. You don't know how they're doing. It's really hard when you've been their mom for a year and then all of a sudden, absolutely nothing. And then after they moved out, we, fostered a little guy for just 2 weeks. And then our youngest, I'm going to call him Patrick, we started fostering him. And he is one of the ones that ended up needing a forever home and we adopted. And then while we were fostering Patrick, we also fostered another little guy. But he was able to go back to family and was adopted by an aunt. But then after that, we found out that Lavender was in need of a home. Her 2 birth brothers had found a forever home and she was still in need of a home. And as soon as we found out, we brought her back. And at that point, our goal was always adoption from the moment she came back into our house. So that's kind of how her story is.
Okay. Is she able now to maintain a relationship with her biological brothers?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, they live not near. I think it's 3 hours away. So we do about every other month a visit so that they can keep that relationship up. And they have, phone numbers and other ways to keep that relationship going.
That's so important. That's something that we're kind of struggling with right now is our foster daughter has 2 biological siblings. One, we have no idea where he or she is. I don't even know if it's a female or a male sibling. And then the other sibling is in another foster family and we're not able to successfully make contact or make visits with them. And that's something that's one of my goals for this year is to make it happen. It's not about me. It's not about the other foster family. It's not about the biological parents. It's about making sure these kids are able to have that connection with their biological family. However I have to do it, I will.
Yeah. And we are so lucky that the family that her brothers are with also feel strongly about it, and they're willing to, make things work and communicate. And it would be very hard otherwise, especially when they were still in care. The foster agent helped make that happen. But, now that Mary's adopted, we are kind of on our own doing it. So it's very important. And I'm very blessed that the other families also makes it a priority so that we can make it happen.
Yeah, that's great. So let's switch gears just a little bit and let's talk about your career. You said you're a high school math teacher. And how do you manage being a working parent of multiple children?
Some days not so good, if I'm going to be totally honest.
There
are days where I just kind of cry in my closet at the end of the day. But for the most part, I have an amazing husband. I don't know if I could do it without him and the support that he gives me, first of all. And then secondly, I have an amazing supportive community. My family, so I'm originally from Wisconsin. That's where I was, raised. And so my family doesn't live anywhere near me. My parents are about 15-hour drive, or 12 if my husband's driving it, but it's a long trip to them. So, and then my husband's family, the closest one is over an hour away. So we don't really have that family support near us. I mean, they support us in, anything they can do, but we don't have that like, hey, I need you right now kind of support. But I have an amazing church family, and there's actually a huge adoption and foster care heart within my church. Like there's other families that foster, and there's other families that have adopted, both out of foster care, overseas, domestic, and they just are there for me. So like when you have that day, and you can text them and they're like, okay, I'm going to take your kids for Friday night and you're just going to relax, or, and vice versa. And so that's kind of how I can do it. It's just leaning on others for support. It's the only way.
So are things different now that we're in the COVID period? Are you teaching virtually, or do any of your kids go to virtual school?
So our district is doing a hybrid, and every district's hybrid looks different. But the way ours look is my kiddos go to school in the morning, and then they work remotely in the afternoon on assignments that the teachers have put in Google Classroom for them. And then my little one, he's only in first grade. That's where we have to do it with him. He doesn't have a Google Classroom or anything. But I actually work all day because I have half of my students in the morning and half in the afternoon. So that's a unique challenge that we have. My husband, thankfully, is working from home right now. So even though he can't sit and do the work with them, he is here in the house to make sure everybody's safe and, everything like that. Because I don't know how we would do it otherwise. So I kind of am really relying on my kids to be responsible and do their things since I'm not home in the afternoon. And so it's definitely been a learning curve of what needs to be done and when. And it's getting better, I think. I think we're starting to adjust, but it's definitely pretty overwhelming.
Well, probably the second we all get used to things and adjust, we'll go back to how things were normally, and then we'll have to readjust.
That's true. There's pros and cons to both of them, I think.
Yeah, it's such a unique challenge for every family because every family has different dynamics. For us, the kids are in daycare and I'm working from home, but Joel is actually going to work still. And so I feel like our situation is pretty easy to navigate, but I can't imagine having school age children and having to like flip your work schedules and the school schedules. And logistically, I think I may have an anxiety attack if that were me.
There's definitely days where, like I said, I may sit in my closet and cry at the end of the night, but we're getting through. And that's less and less as we get used to it.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't have biological children, so I'm kind of unclear about how dynamics work between biological, adoptive, and foster children. How do they all get along with one another?
So I am so insanely blessed with my biological kids and how they've always accepted any children we take care of immediately with their whole hearts. And pretty much they love and fight like siblings right from the get-go. And so I would say, it's pretty similar. Like my two daughters that are older, they're like a year apart and they fight and get along just like you would expect any sisters that are about a year apart. They're either best friends or worst enemies. So I honestly don't see too much of a difference on how they treat each other than just any other traditional siblings.
When you first began fostering or as you were fostering, how old were your biological children? Like, were they old enough to where they were able to give you input?
So my youngest was only 2 at the time, so she obviously wasn't able to. So I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So there wasn't a lot of input, I guess, but they definitely loved and accepted the kiddos from the get-go. It was probably just as hard on them when the kids leave as it would be on me because, that was their family for a year and then all of a sudden they were gone. And so that's really hard on kids.
Yeah, it adds a whole new dynamic to foster care reunification, I feel like, is other children that are living in the home because they're experiencing it just as much as we are.
For sure. And one thing I have to say that's amazing is even though their hearts were broken, as soon as those next kiddos came to live with us, they didn't put up a wall. They didn't try to protect themselves. It was just like, okay, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to love you just like I loved the last kiddos. And I don't know if all kids would be able to do that. And so I'm very thankful that my kids were like that.
That's amazing. A product of good parenting, I think.
Maybe.
So is there anything you wish you would have known going into becoming a foster or adoptive parent that you now know? Would you go back and give yourself any bits of advice?
I would. I wish I had known more about how the trauma truly affected the development and brain development of the kiddos coming in, because I think I didn't truly understand that when I started. And I misinterpreted a lot of behaviors because of that. And going back, I wish I just had more knowledge of that aspect of how trauma influences their behaviors and how to help them navigate that.
Yes, that makes complete sense. And I'm actually really glad you said that. I completely agree. And actually, on one of my next episodes, I'm going to be interviewing a professional who works with parents who parent children who have experienced trauma. And that was my first question to her was, how do you tell the difference in behavior if it's just a behavior of a child who hasn't experienced trauma or if it did stem from trauma? So I'm so glad that you brought that up, and I'm hoping to get more answers from her. I think she'll be a good help too.
Yeah, I have done a lot more research in the last few years that I wish I would have even thought to do. I didn't even know that was anything when I started, if that makes sense. Like, so it wasn't like I neglected it. It just wasn't even in my radar. And I wish I would have known more about that.
Yes, I completely agree. So can you share some of the difficulties or the struggles that you've experienced as a foster or adoptive parent?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones I think is that occasionally my foster adoptive kiddos will project their feelings from maybe their birth parents or even a step birth parent onto me because they don't know where else to put it. And that's really hard because they'll say or do things that aren't true and they don't even really mean. But in that moment, it's like they have to get it out and I'm the place that it goes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you have any advice for handling that? My kids are just babies, so I haven't gotten there yet. But how do you handle that? Or what have you found that has worked?
My husband has to remind me, like he has to speak that truth, I guess you would say, where after everything's calmed down and everything's good, he has to remind me, like, that's not you. That's not who they were actually talking to. And it's still hard. And I have started seeing a counselor more often since I started doing foster care and adoption, because there's times where you just need someone outside of the situation to be able to kind of talk through some of that stuff, to get that other perspective on, okay, like, how do I handle this? And how do I accept that this is what's true? Even though it's like, I know it, I don't know it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I would recommend to anybody seeing a counselor or seeing a therapist is so important because I've tried to avoid that and instead confide in like my good friends or my little circle. And it doesn't matter how good my friends are. They always have some sort of bias towards agreeing with me, which is not what I want. And so I would recommend, and I don't care if you have the perfect fairy tale life. I think everybody should see a counselor at least at certain points of their life. It's so important.
Oh, I agree. And I love my counselor. She'll point out things, that I'm not ready to hear, but I need to hear. And she'll tell me like where my
Yes.
thinking is way off. And my friends probably won't do that because they're my friends.
Right. Yeah.
But
They
I
kind of
need to
want to
hear
tell
it.
you what you want to hear. Yeah. What is your favorite part about being a foster or adoptive parent?
Oh, I think just, so my kids that I've adopted are more likely to just randomly come up to me and just be like, I love you, mom, or leave me love notes, or, just things like that. And there's just something so special and heartbreaking at the same time about that. And I think that's probably just those good times and seeing their growth from when they started living with us to where they are now. It's just huge. And so on bad days, sometimes I need to remind myself of growth, how far they've come.
So cute. My son, Brooks, he's adopted and he's just kind of starting to learn how to talk. And so I have a goal right now of trying to teach him to say, I love you. And instead he's only picking up like his favorite word right now is stinky, because that's what I say when I change his diaper is stinky. And so he'll say that, he'll say, uh-oh, and he will not say, I love you. I say it to him 8,000 times every day just to get him to repeat it. And I swear the day that he repeats it, we're going to have a huge celebration. That is my goal.
It'll come. And it's really cute. My little guy, Patrick, he's the one too that will randomly just put his head on my shoulder and start rubbing my back. And I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, it's just like melts your heart. And he'll do that usually after he's pushed me to the limit of my patience. And then he'll like rub my cheek and be like, you're so pretty. And I was like, smart. But next time, just do what I'm asking.
That is so cute. Are you currently accepting additional placements, or are you looking to adopt again, or is your family complete?
I wouldn't say we're necessarily complete because I just never know when God's going to be like, nope, you're not done. But I definitely feel peace right now that for this moment, this is what our family is. And it's focusing on helping the kiddos that we currently have through, some of them they're getting the teenage years. We have 2 teenagers and a 12-year-old, and they're needing more attention and help with figuring out how to manage their emotions and everything like that than, when they were little. So I used to think that it got easier when they got older. And you might need to tell yourself that to make it through, because I did. And it's not, though. It's definitely not easier as they get older. But tell yourself that if that's what gets you through the day, because that's what I did.
Yes, I definitely will. And I also feel like that's something Joel and I kind of disagree on. I mean, we don't fight over it, but I don't feel like our family is totally complete, and he does. So I'll have to work on him a little bit, or maybe he'll get a sign that he also believes our family is not complete. We'll see.
I do have to say that I'm a firm believer you both have to be 100% on board when you're going to go through this journey, as I'm sure you know, because there's no way to do it with one on and one not really wanting to be there and be effective.
Oh, yes, 100%. Before you take the leap or even begin like a foster class or an adoption journey, yes, you both have to be 100% there.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the halfway maybes. It's not going to work if that's how you're approaching it.
Yes. So do you have conversations with your adopted children about their biological families or their biological parents, or do they have visits? How does that work?
So I kind of leave that to them to start the conversation. My little guy, is just starting to ask the questions. Like, we've never hidden the fact that, obviously either of my kiddos are adopted. Like, it's not something that is hush hush. We're very open about it. But usually I kind of let them lead the conversation when they want to talk about it. And neither of them have any sort of connection or interaction with their biological parents. But when they got older, if that was something they wanted, then we could definitely talk about, how to do that safely and for us to help them with that.
Something I wonder about adoption, and I just haven't gotten to this point yet, but I would imagine that most adoptive children, when they get older, do either ask more about their biological parents or even want to reach out and talk to them or meet them. And I guess I'm wondering, if you've adopted through foster care, do they provide you with the biological parents' information, or how would you find them if you thought it was necessary or it was time to do that?
So we know the names of their biological parents. And so it would just be a matter of, seeking them out if that was what we decided to do.
Okay. That thought just kind of came up within the last couple weeks because my adopted son was not necessarily through foster care. And so we maintained a connection with his biological family. I have their phone numbers. I know where they live. Like, we're pretty close, but I just didn't know how that would work if it happened through foster care and you may not be as close with the biological family. So that's interesting. Thank you for answering that. I know that there are many listeners who are kind of on the fence about becoming a foster parent or starting the adoption process. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, like I said, my first thing would be make sure you and your, if you're married, your spouse are totally on board together. Also, I think just doing your research on trauma and how it affects the brain so that if you do go through foster care, you don't misinterpret, things and make assumptions that aren't necessarily true. And then I would say find a support system, because that's how I have, gotten through some of the hard times. And make sure it's a positive support system that's, going to uplift you and listen to you and let you be real, but then also kind of uplift you and help you look at the positives and, help you not give up. That would be my advice.
Yes, love that. If listeners have a question or they'd like to talk to you after the podcast airs, how can they reach you?
So I do have an email address set up for the book, and that'd probably be the best one. So it's just the same thing as my website, but it's just mypatchworkfamilybook@gmail.com. And so I check that regularly. So I would love to hear from them, or any questions they might have. Things like that would be amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely encourage listeners to check out the website, enter your email so you get notified when the book is available for purchase, and check it out, because I can attest that it is so cute and I'm looking forward to my physical copy. So thank you. And thank you for sharing your story with us. Before we wrap up completely, I do need to give a huge shout out to my editor, Ruben. As always, he is my lifesaver. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave some kind words for us on Apple Podcasts. Seeing that feedback is really what kind of makes our hearts happy and keeps us motivated, and knowing that you're enjoying what we're doing. And we have seen so much love in those reviews. It makes me feel so good. So thank you for that. And of course, a huge thanks to you, Ginger, for sharing your story with us, also sharing your book. And I really appreciated talking to you.
You too. And I thank you so much for having this podcast. I think a lot of times families that are interested or want to foster don't even know where to start or where to find support. So I think this is an amazing resource for them.
Thank you so much. And I also really look forward to the sequel of your book. So when that's available, I'll also mention it on the podcast, and maybe you can come back and tell us about it.
That would be amazing. Maybe I could see if my Lavender even wants to come and talk more about how she chose what to share and stuff like that. So we'll see how she's feeling.
I love that idea. We have never had like a youth adopted child on the podcast. That's a great idea. We should definitely do it if she's comfortable.
Okay. I will see what she thinks about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day, and we will talk to you later.
Perfect. Thank you.